Rewind a little bit. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Regeneration, the anti-talking head series, where we go into thoughtful discussions about what it really takes to get regenerative solutions out there. Today, we're doing something a little special and we're doing something a little different. Today, as you guys saw, today's session was an hour and a half. Uh, we're not going to have something where I interview Antony as much as you've seen in the past, albeit I'm dying to get this man on an interview where I can just pick his brain because if you guys have never met this wonderful human being, Anthony's been doing this so long that every time I have a one-to-one with him, he spends the majority of his time on the Wayback Machine, pulling up old resources at the top of his head from 15, 20 years ago. The sites aren't even there anymore, and trying to find resources about community hubs, trying to find resources about revitalization of urban communities, about really doing the responsible thing. So first off, I love this man for his brain. I love this man for the work he's done over the years. I love him for the work that he does with SDG goals, working with the United Nations as well. And I am so blessed and so happy to bring him into this environment. Um, all of this said, today we're going to talk about some difficult conversations, different topics. I need you guys to be very intentional to not bring ideology or politics into this and really just talk about what these subjects mean from us at a heart because we're trying to learn and have an opportunity to increase the way that we communicate these things to possibly have less conflict or less resistance in the future. So hopefully this is an opportunity for all of us. And Anthony's going to take this off the rails a little bit. He's got murals, he's got some presentations, he's got some little things all over, and we're going to make this as interactive as we can. So, with that, be very cognizant if you're trying to ask questions or if we're going down a rabbit hole for too long. Let's try to reel it back and ensure we move the whole conversation along. So, that said, I'm going to turn it right over to Anthony. Anthony, can you just briefly give us some background on all the great work that encompasses your wide portfolio of work?
I will do my very best. Thank you for that lovely introduction, Sage. I very much appreciate the warm words. And hold on a second, let me just get that in there. And hopefully I can follow through on the promises that you have just made. And hopefully we'll have an interesting and perhaps even useful conversation. Recognizing that this is all about conversation and not about Sage on the stage, um, I will do my best to avoid to facilitate and surface conversation and ideas rather than to try and inject my own. Although I will do that a little bit. So I just shared in my in the chat my social and biophysical acknowledgements for my place. So I'm in Takaronto, or Toronto, as us settlers know it, in Ontario, Canada, and we're part of the Canadian part of the Interior Plateau and Southern Great Lake Forests bioregion and Lake Erie lowlands. So, and from a social perspective, this is land that is today actively stewarded by the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, who are the current inheritors from an Indigenous perspective of this place. And more in the words that I've just shared. So I won't say much more about this. In terms of me, I guess perhaps some people have called me a positive maverick. I think I've spent my entire career, even when I was in more classic roles in business, being a maverick, but doing it in a way that is trying to be useful and helpful to those around me. And these days, what I believe, because my focus is in the world of human organizations and human businesses, and in the second part of this sharing that I'm doing with the GRC, I will explain why I've chosen to work in this space. But what I believe is that business must play a key role in enabling the possibility for flourishing for humanity and all other life for generations to come. And that I believe without a fundamental shift in business, the possibility for systems change writ large, social justice, environmental regeneration, and beyond to full spectrum flourishing is and will remain highly constrained. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. So I spent 20 plus years as a management consultant, doing IT enabled business transformation. And then about 18 years ago, realized that I had no idea about the context of what it was I was doing. I had no idea about the broader, even economic issues of the work that I was doing, and certainly nothing about the broader social and environmental context of what I was doing. So I went back and did my graduate work at York University in the Faculty of Environmental Studies, and graduated in 2013 with a master's in a unique master's in environmental studies on business model design and sustainability, and a graduate diploma in business and the environment. And since then, I've been convening a worldwide community to take the results of that graduate work and start to use them practically in the world and do research around that. Um, I am a fellow of the Canadian Association of Management Consultants, as is Lynn McDonnell, who's on the call with us today. And actually, I have Lynn to thank for putting me forward for that award about a year ago. And my front doorbell has just gone. It's Amazon. I have to go and deal with this. Hold on one second.
Well, without pause and while he's doing that, Lynn, if you can, just really quickly in 30 seconds before he comes back, can you just sort of tell us some of the things that you've appreciated about some of your work and shared work with Antony over the years?
Well, right now I'm taking the Flourishing Business Canvas course, which Antony recommended, and it really nests, the process of a business into the environment, social, economic, and the wider environment. So that's very cool. And but Antony is a real leader in this space and has an international following and has, regular webinars and so forth that illuminate people trying to do things right for the planet, for people, and make businesses viable. So enterprise it's usually talked about as business, but it of course applies to any organization, and the methods are classic. So I'm really enjoying that. And the value of Antony's experience is that he's like a galaxy brain, as you say, when it comes to the resources, but he also has that listening and learning mode, which I really appreciate. So,
I agree with all of that. Yeah, I agree with all of that. It's he has one where he can take what you're saying and his fingers will start moving as he's grokking through it all. And then by the time you finish what you say, he's got 10 references for you back and a way for you to explore your learning and sometimes in a little bit of an overwhelming way, but it gives you a lot to read or for follow on, sometimes for weeks afterwards, which I appreciate. Antony, you back yet? Saw you move off camera for just a second. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and kick this
Sage,
off then and talk about
Tanuja?
what we're doing for
yes,
today.
it's Tanuja here.
Please.
Just a quick note. At least for me, your voice sounds like you're speaking from a cave. I don't know if that's true for the others.
I
No,
can
it's
find
totally normal.
a little echoey, but pretty normal.
My sincere apologies.
I need to get a new
Amazon,
microphone, it sounds like. Okay, thank you for that.
so sorry about that, folks. For some reason, Amazon has now insisted that for certain things, they want you to give them a code before they'll give the package to you. Anyway, apologies.
So,
Right,
Anthony,
so
let's jump into the container for today and talk
yes,
about what we'll be
yes,
doing, and let's just
yes,
go ahead and jump right into it, please.
absolutely. So let me share my screen. Thank you for moving us along. That's good. Okay. Okay. Let me move that out of the way. Okay. All right. So the Sage and I were talking about how we might have an interesting conversation. We thought we would be a little provocative. Um, and so that's how the title of this session came to be. We're making an assertion that the term regeneration perhaps isn't landing as usefully as it might, and to prompt the question, well, what could we do about it? So So the objective that I have certainly for today is to share and explore the usefulness to the GRC community of the work of the community that I'm part of, which is the Flourishing Business community, which is part of a wider flourishing enterprise movement. And as I said, hopefully interactive, two-way, and hopefully thought-provoking and useful. Two parts. Today we're going to explore what should humanity's purpose be and how does regeneration contribute to that, and explore our collective experience. And I'm going to make a suggestion in that conversation. And then on April the 1st, we're going to explore the question of what can we do to accelerate systems change to realize that purpose. And that's where I'm going to really go into the depths of the 15 years of practice and research that I've done since I finished my master's. Okay, exploring regeneration. So this is, as Sage has pointed out to me several times, is all about language. And the reason that language is important, of course, is because it frames everything we do to change systems for the better. And one analogy that I personally like is the idea that language creates the water in which we swim. And indeed, language will determine in significant measure whether we individually and collectively will float, swim, or drown. And so the words we use, how we use them, how other people understand them, is pretty important. So, when we use a word, what do we actually mean? What do others think we mean when we use a word? Are we using words that are describing processes when we need to state our intended purposes, or outcomes or goals? Do our terms that we use create resonance with the people that we're seeking to influence and engage, or confusion? So these are some of the questions that are sort of in the background as we go through the next 3 steps that I'm going to take us through. So going to leap right into the practical. So let me just bring up my mural here. Where's that gone?
To everyone, the link to the mural that he's sharing on the screen, I've just put in chat as well. So you can all open it up too.
Yeah, I'm just going to get the link to the specific spot in the mural.
Okay, sure.
Let me just do that. But I've lost my. Okay, so it's this one here on the right. So what I would like to invite you all to do, just copy the link to this particular object and put that in the chat. So here's the link to the particular spot in the mural that I'd like us to focus on. What I would like to do, sorry, I'm trying to juggle several things here at the same time. So when you hear the word regeneration, I'd like us to sticky note, if we could, to start with, just in silence. What occurs to you when you hear the word regenerative or regeneration, in any context that you like? Could be personally, could be professionally. And perhaps you might want to reflect on, when have you had an experience that you describe as regenerative? What comes to mind when you think about that experience? How does being regenerative or contributing to regeneration make you feel? What's the purpose or goal of regeneration? So just invite all of us to jump into the mural. To create a sticky, you just double click and a sticky will appear, and you can then just type, and we'll spend, I don't know, 5-7 minutes just in quiet contemplation, filling in the answers, filling out our responses to this prompt. Any questions or concerns?
Can you go ahead and copy and paste those 3 questions that you had into chat, please?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
Can we do more than one sticky?
Absolutely. You can do as many stickies as you like. Yes, you don't have to, and it's probably good if you have. Why is that not copying and pasting? You're probably good if you actually do have multiple. Here we go. Yeah, there's the questions in the chat, and probably better if you have multiple thoughts, then multiple stickies is a good idea, probably.
All right, for the purpose of time, everyone, you got about 1 more minute. All right, everyone, let's wrap up. 2 minutes, please. Okay, I'll give you 1 more minute. I'll give you 60 seconds. Watching the clock. There's some good stuff in here.
We need time to reflect and have a chance for things to surface as people reflect.
All righty, sir. I think they're buttoning up here. I think you're all set.
I think so. Okay, wonderful. So let me go back to my slides here for a second. And so I'm just going to bring all of these up, I think. I'm very curious. Now you've had a chance to reflect on this word regeneration. I have some questions that I'd like to invite you all to think about, and invite any of you who would like to share your thoughts to speak up for a few minutes about these reflection questions. So I won't read them out. You're quite capable of doing that for yourself. So I'm curious, what do people think about this word regeneration?
I'm wondering how we know that regeneration isn't landing. I mean, of course, I'm around a bunch of people who are regenerators, and I'm in that, bubble. But is it not landing? It may
When
not
I'm
be.
talking to people outside our ecosystem, when I leave from behind my desk to get out there, when I use words like regeneration, even to the impact world that is serving my ecosystem, I have to explain what the context of what that means almost every time.
Gotcha. Thank you.
But that's just what I see.
No,
Please.
if it's happening for you, it's probably happening for lots of people, and I imagine it would happen for me too. So thank you.
Dave.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's very clear myself. I use it all the time, and I kind of see, that's what I'm working on is regeneration, and I don't think it's very clear. Part of that is for me is like my personal experience of I felt like there was a realization, there was like an epiphany that went with my adopting the word regeneration. So it's probably like seeing Jesus or something like that. So like, when you believe kind of. And so maybe that's just the normal part because there's been a learning step that has to happen, and that takes time and effort and, wrestling with a new idea. And also it just may be a bad word. I don't know. There's a little bit of, I have both things going on in my head.
Brian.
I think a regeneration is well defined in an engineering sense. And secondly, I'm reminded of the book, the same name by Paul Hawken. So is this a problem of literacy? I think it's fine to define it. I guess there are two questions. Whether do people understand the word regeneration? The second is, do they react positively to it and when they do understand it? So I guess there are two parts to that question.
Lynn.
I'm observing that we are wanting it to have a definition, a field of, understanding. And it's very reductive of us, right, to sort of try to pin it down and get a common agreement. And I'm thinking that what regeneration points to as a word is something that is intended to be elusive but certainly with qualities that we may agree on, but we can't kind of wrap up and tie with a bow. So I'm just noticing that we are doing what we humans do in the Western society, which is seek definitions.
Sage.
I'm seeing it in chat used metaphorically. I hear as talking saying it's used in governance. I hear as talking saying sometimes it's a process as well. So, and I do believe that I too have struggles with trying to explain it because I often have to understand the context of the person asking the question to me so I can frame it in a way that they may understand. So I struggle with some of this too.
And I love the comments in the chat. I will open pull back the curtain a little bit and say that the next word we're going to explore is the word sustainable. And so that's a very good anticipation by some of you. Tanuja.
So I agree with the comment about Bill Reed. I think he really defined it. But the unfortunate part is the use of the word or reuse of the word regeneration, because the outside world connects it to the word generate, regenerate. So they kind of assumed something that was generated has died, and we're trying to regenerate it, bring it back to life. And I agree with Lynn also that we're putting too much emphasis on definitions because it is a term that is, at least this usage, is new, and we should live with the uncertainty as we build its meaning. I don't think any of us is in doubt that what we mean is life and living systems.
And so apologies for taking the sort of dictionary definition. Regeneration, in my understanding, based on what's in the dictionary at any rate, is about bringing something back. That's the re part of regeneration.
Yes.
You have a different definition. I'm very curious to hear what it is.
Using Bill Reed's diagram as an example, regeneration is a progressive meaning progressing down, and increased coexistence with nature. So sustainable was something human beings did. Restore is another thing that human beings did. Regenerate is when we humans acknowledge ourselves as one and the same as nature itself. So we co-create, we co-live, we co-grow, we co-learn.
Thank you. Rick.
Yeah, thank you, Antony. I put a question in when I'm going to do an AI search on it, but the thing about definitions that they're not actions; they're descriptors of a construct. And I'm going to put the Rondium rule, which I'll put in the text shortly, is action, and it's understanding what it means without having to define what regeneration means. That can come later. And I just wanted to share a little video that I saw on LinkedIn, which was amazing, about the Japanese obsession with cleanliness. And apparently they clean, their toilets are incredibly clean. When they have cleaning trucks, everything's clean. And that speaks to the whole notion of how a culture adopts a systemic practice. The question is, the analogy is, well, how can we learn from this Japanese example of how to make a systemic change that embraces regeneration using simple rules rather than first principles? First principles are conceptuals. Simple rules actually tell us what we profess to agree to do. Anyway, I'll add a link towards the end about the AI search that I'm doing on this topic.
Okay, thank you. And I see that thank you. Who was it who just shared the Bill-Reed diagram? Alex. And I think people like Daniel Christian Weil have used a very similar idea of degenerative versus regenerative. So that's very helpful. Nikki.
Hi. I feel like personally, I've seen that it can be controversial. I recently made a post on one of the platforms I post on about social regeneration and some ideas on how that might work. And there was an Indigenous woman that responded and said, we've been begging for that forever, and going back to the introduction of the first white settlers and colonizers and so forth, and how they were willing to work with them and got betrayed. And then, of course, I shouldn't say of course, but no, I'll say of course the person was a white person that responded, a man who responded and said, why would we ever want that when we can keep our power instead? So I was so triggered, I knew not to respond at that moment in time. I was going to really break my professional stance there in a moment. But that's what sat with me. There is a desire for those initial connections, but they were so long ago. So how do we remember how to not be so violent against each other in a social way when we talk about social regeneration and so forth? That's what came up for me.
Thank you, Nikki. Tally.
Regeneration happens internally as well as externally. And so when we begin to feel that connection and to understand ourselves, like to really be able to self-reflect and to choose that point of view, and then also to understand what it means collectively in our society and in our little tribes in our society, and then to take action, then you get self-rightening and self-correcting, because most of nature naturally is regenerative. But we, unfortunately, as a species, are struggling with that mindset.
Indeed, we certainly are. Any other thoughts or comments as we reflect on this term, regeneration? I haven't heard many people talking about how it makes you feel. How does the term regeneration make you feel?
Positive.
Hopeful.
Responsible.
Inspired and interested.
Very good.
Optimistic. That was kind of, and that was part of what motivated it for me, because I felt I was coming out of a very pessimistic and negative space.
Very good. Very good. Okay. Hopefully that was interesting. I certainly learned quite a bit out of that conversation that I wasn't aware of before. So it's helped me understand a little bit more about this community, which I'm a guest here. So the next thing I wanted to do was pick another word that's already been brought up that I think might serve as a bit of a contrast. And will spark some interesting conversation as well. And that word is sustainability, sustainable development, being an associated idea. And of course, the word sustainable again has a common English meaning, which means to keep things the same, or the ability to keep things the same. That is interesting considering where we currently are. Do we actually want to sustain where we are? Is a question that I often ask people who use this word. So let me get the mural back up and share the link to the section of the mural that we're going to sticky note some responses to this. And this time I actually have some results from earlier conversations that I've had with other people, which I will share after you've had a chance to reflect on it. So let me just put the link to this section of the mural in the chat. So that will take you directly to the right section of the mural. And again, we'll give you a few minutes for you to sticky note that. And it's again the same questions. And again, I will put those into the chat as well. What does the word sustainable, what does occur to you when you hear the word sustainable or sustainable development, professionally or personally? Have you had an experience you describe as sustainable? What comes to mind when you think about that experience? How does it make you feel? What is the purpose or goal of sustainability or sustainable development? So let me get that into the chat as the questions to help. Again, I'll zoom in here so you can see what other people are doing here. Okay, maybe one more minute. So while we let people put their final thoughts in, Sage, you said in the bottom right-hand corner, you said the word itself needs ownership, context as to what we're describing as a sustainable practice may still be harmful. Can you say a little bit more about that? You're still on mute.
I think when we use that word, we must define what the container is that we're calling sustainable, because I think it's been greenwashed so much that we might be defining something that's sustainable within a business or something that might be sustainable within a community, but it necessarily doesn't really talk about the responsibility of what the sustainable action is to an ecosystem necessarily. So I think the word sustainability, without definition of who or what we're talking about as far as the ownership, can be very misleading, is what I was trying to point to.
I very much agree. One of the most influential things that I read while I was doing my graduate work was a book called, which has some unfortunate connotations from a economics perspective, but it's called Supply Side Sustainability. But they were talking about the supply of the possibility for sustainability being sunlight. So very much, Brian, to your quote earlier. And they said that given so I'm going to go physicist on you for a second here and talk about the laws of thermodynamics. Given that and the proposed fourth law of thermodynamics, which is that we live in a semi-open system. So we're open to energy, but mostly closed to most materials. As a result of that, something rather interesting seems to happen on our planet, and that is that structure gets created. And of course, if I get this right, second law of thermodynamics says entropy always increases. But in a semi-open system, we actually get structure occurring, which is the opposite of entropy. It's less chaos. So some very interesting work has been done to study the temperature around planets with and without life. So temperature being a proxy for entropy. So a low temperature around a planet would be high entropy, and a higher temperature around a planet would be lower entropy. So around planets with life on, like Earth, the temperature is lower than the temperature around planets without life. In other words, life is creating entropy. Life is a process to create more entropy faster based on the incoming energy into that semi-open system. And so the supply side sustainability people said that means that everything on a planet with life is changing all the time because it's all this high quality energy is arriving every day. So if we're going to use the word sustainability or to sustain, we ought to be really clear, and this I think was the point, Harper, Sage, you were getting at, which is that we need to be really clear about what are we going to stop from changing, because it will change if we don't do anything because of the energy arriving. How long are we going to want to try and keep it the same to sustain it? How much is that going to cost? And that is not just in financial terms, but in all cost measures. And who is going to benefit from keeping it the same? So the question about power. And I found those four questions very, very useful when it comes to talking to people when they use the word sustainable and sustainability and sustainable development. Because to your point, Sage, most of the time, most people can't answer those four questions convincingly. So thank you for that, Sticky, to provoke that, and apologies for the little the mini lecture there, impromptu mini lecture. Okay, let me share. So thank you for all of those words. It's clear that in this community, the word sustainable has a pretty negative connotation in general, and that is very understandable. Let me share with you some. David, go ahead, please.
Well, and I'm sorry, I missed the lecture that Anthony, I had to go off, but I'm also struck from the GRC experience that people come to the word regeneration from different perspectives. And if somebody came to it from a sustainability perspective, if you've been working on climate change stuff, then you have a set of biases. But if you came into the word from like permaculture or something else, then it's a different set of biases. So, it really matters which lens you're coming in from, I think.
Absolutely. For some people, it can have quite positive connotations. So, from other times that I've done exercises similar to this, here are some words that other people have used when they react to the word sustainable. And as you can see, there is a range of neutral / slightly positive words, as well as a whole bunch of fairly negative words up here as well. And I think that, David, reflects the point you were just making quite nicely, that it depends on where you're coming from. So, same questions as last time. When we use this word sustainable, what do people think in comparison to the word regenerative? Actually, no, let's not do the comparison to regenerative. Let's just take the word by itself for a second. What sort of things trip us up when we use this word? Because the intention of the Sustainable Development Goals, the headline, right, in the Brundtland Commission report, ensure that the needs of the present are met while ensuring that the needs of the future generations can be met, seems like and that we want to sustain that, and we want to sustain development in ways that enable that to happen. At least superficially, sounds quite attractive. I mean, it's attractive enough that we managed to get every country on the planet to sign on to the Agenda 2030, and the concept of sustainable development, which is, in my view, one of the biggest gifts humanity's ever given itself, that we have this common idea about where we're trying to get to. But what do you think? What do you all think about this word sustainable?
I think it's just like you described. You used it in a way that provided the context, it provided the scope, it provided the overarching sort of framing of how you mean, or how you're hoping that is received as well with that description. Which just means that when we're using that word sustainable, we have to be very careful in the way that we're phrasing it, and maybe very systemic, and what we're trying to be responsible to, and very transparent to that, to hold integrity.
Lynn.
It's a word that's been sullied at this point, right? Sullied in terms of it's been taken over by definitions that degrade it as a word. Nonetheless, it still is it is potentially a door opener for certain communities, because you have to relate to where they are and what triggers them or what they feel responsible for. But I will leave it at that. But it's a great discussion, Antony.
Rick.
Yeah, just to build on what Lynn was talking about, it's a semantic issue, and you can frame it positively, negatively, or neutrally. So, and the spin artists are very effective of taking something positive and turning it into something negative, and vice versa. I want to frame it within the Sustainable Development Goals, because that's something I know something about, which is I agree with you. It's an amazing document, but one of the limitations of it, one of the downsides of it, is that it's treated as a reductionist framework, which is antithetical to regenerative practices, and it doesn't embrace complexity, thinking, and doing into the framework. And so, people work on one wicked problem there, but don't realize they're making another wicked problem worse somewhere else. And so it lacks an overarching framework, and that's one of the limitations of the Sustainable Development Goals. Or they're incredibly laudable, but the operationalizing of them has been a failure from my perspective, and we can debate that one. It's up to you, Antony, whether you think it's been a success or a failure. It's been more of a failure than a success. Aspirationally, it's been a phenomenal success, but at an implementation level, it's been a failure.
I have many things to say, but I'm going to let Dave speak first.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd like to hear too. Well, yeah, and I was just, I kind of think I'm partly going to echo what Rick was saying, is I feel like the sustainability, I mean, it's an established term, right? And so it kind of it's used to refer to an era, I guess, basically. So it goes back to I think the Brundtland Commission was from the late 80s or something like that. So it's, got 40, 50 years behind it now. And I do think we can see eras of, environmentalism, right? I mean, in the turn of the 19th century, we were creating national parks, and it was a conservation notion. And it was like, no, we don't want people touching these spaces, And then you had a new era where it was corporate, or where it was regulatory, right? And the EPA came in, and the government was going to tell people what to do. And then, at least EDF will talk about how then we invited corporations into the game. And so then you created ESG and things like that. And that's much more the sustainability kind of realm. ESG, I think, into the sustainability realm. So each of these are generations. And in my mind, regeneration represents the next generation of this stuff. And it is fundamentally different because it doesn't have the mechanical stuff that Rick's talking about. I think that it's trying to be more living systems, more holistic. And so it represents an important transition of thinking. And we need names for these things. So sustainability just kind of takes the knock, is my guess.
Callie.
Having just done a master's in this type of stuff, my background is really communications, and I feel like it's important, yes, for us as a culture, but what does it mean to the everyday person? Like sustainability is positive in my household and amongst many working people, So I would distinguish between the movement itself and then how it reaches into popular culture. Or finance, or anyone who is not like people who are actually thinking outside of the sustainability, let's save the world movement.
Absolutely. I think that's right, that the understanding by most everyday people it's a positive idea, and has some currency as far as that's concerned. So to react to a few things that have just been said, the problem with the very definition of sustainable development as a particular contextualization of the word sustainable happens in the very next couple of sentences following the headline that everybody knows. But people very rarely read the rest of the paragraph in the Brundtland Commission report. Because what it then goes on to say is that there are no limits to development except those imposed by technology, and our ability to be to apply that technology. And so there's no recognition, because frankly, systems thinking wasn't much of a thing in the late 1980s, of the idea that there might be any limits. And while limits to growth had come out, 20 years earlier, that was highly controversial and had not been widely accepted as a parameter for thinking about the future of humanity, which is what Brundtland was tasked to do after the first two UN environmental conferences in the 80s, I think it was, that the Brundtland Commission was commissioned at the second one and appeared as a prelude to the third one, if I remember correctly. So that idea that you can have unending economic growth on a finite planet is baked into the very definition of the term from its origins. And of course, it is there in the SDGs in Goal 8, which is decent work and economic growth. And it's very much understood that the economic growth is a requirement to generate the wealth to execute the work necessary to achieve many, if not most, of the other goals. In fact, the ecological economists, those are the economists who understand that the economy is inside society and that society is intimately interdependent with the environment, and entirely dependent upon the environment ultimately. Those economists published a critique of the SDGs when the SDGs were approved in 2015, which goes into a lot of the things that you mentioned, Rick, in terms of the contradictions when you get into the 169 targets under the 17 goals. Achieving some of those targets in one goal requires other goals to fail to be achieved. And it's all premised on this idea of an unending economic growth on a finite planet, which obviously is a non-starter. Sage.
Yeah, so I'm getting a lot of private messages from several members, and one of the questions that was brought up is when we're looking at sustainability and we're looking at the definition of this, like we've gone down this path a few times just within GRC alone, and the question but what's the point? Where are we going here with this, and what are we hoping to change and learn? So we do have some questions around why are we doing this practice as far as what the next steps are and the growth. So can we just take a minute and possibly pause for reflection as far as where we think we can go with some of this fundamental knowledge that we're learning?
Um, I'm gonna invite us to take one step before doing that reflection, Sage, if I might.
Please.
Because when I've facilitated conversations like this before, what I found useful is to ask this question before we get into what are better words, what is more useful language. We ought to have a conversation about a meta conversation about what would be the attributes of better words if we were to choose some better words. And so I've got a proposal that I'd like to make to the group, and I'd like some feedback on the proposal. And that proposal is that there are 4 tests, if you like, that we ought to have in mind as we're coming up with better words, and as we're thinking about the pros and cons of different words. And here are the tests that I've come up with, and I'm really curious as to get everybody's reaction to these. The first is whatever words we use that could be perhaps more better, perhaps the word useful is more appropriate, is that they have to encapsulate things that are realistic and practical. So we can't be talking about things that are seen as utopian or worse, dystopian. We need something that's very realistic and practical. The second thing is that they have to be driven by our values. So whatever idea we come up, we need to have embedded in it our best ethical and human rights frameworks. Brian.
Yeah, I like what Lynn said, and that is that the words should be specific to our audience, and we should be choosing words that mean the same thing, that we can agree on similar definitions for the audience. And so it is audience specific, I would say.
Absolutely, yes. Or the word needs to be fungible enough that it can create a big tent. One or both. Could be an and. The third thing is that it needs to be really attractive. It needs to be something that appeals to people at a very visceral level, and that people go, "Oh, I want that. I want that for myself. I want that for my family. I want that for my community. I want that for the planet. I want that for my country." So it needs the words better. A more useful word would be very attractive, and as we've noted, certainly sustainability for many people is no longer attractive. For some, it is still, but for many, it's no longer attractive. And the last test that I'm suggesting might be useful for us to think about is that whatever this better word is, or better words are, it needs to be informed by science. So, we can't accept an idea that assumes that, for example, unending economic growth on a finite planet, which, the natural sciences tell us very clearly is not aligned with what science tells us. And it also needs to be aligned with our deep indigenous wisdoms. And I deliberately put that in the plural because there are many indigenous wisdom traditions around the world, including the indigenous traditions that many of us who are settlers would have had originally before modernization, before the Enlightenment, before Reformation, before modernism occurred. So I think there's a lot there to be learned. And in the Canadian context, this idea of two-eyed seeing has become quite popular recently. The idea that we have 2 ontologies. In the Canadian context, it would be the Canadian Indigenous way of knowing and the scientific way of knowing, and that these 2 ontologies are not to be subsumed within one another, which is the colonization tendency for science to try and subsume what the science considers the useful part of an indigenous way of knowing, but rather to say that they're equal ways of knowing, but different, and therefore complementary, and therefore both useful. Rick.
Yeah, I really like what you've presented here, and I'll just articulate it in a slightly different way. In complexity science, as you know, they talk about attractors, how to make attractors within a system. That's critically important because without that, you can't get alignment across diverse mindsets. The realistic and practical one resonates with the notion of simple rules. First principles, going from first principles to simple rules is a complex process. To reduce to something where everyone can understand it and agree this is what we need to do. The reference that I made to the Rondian rule, by the way, goes beyond the golden rule and the platinum rule. And it's really a transition from the Anthropocene to the Silentocene era because we need to have a simple rule that acknowledges that we're in living systems. Your point about science and humanities, that's just a given. Without that, but the problem, we're living in a culture that invalidates that. Where I have a slight difference to what you're saying is, so, in the business world, people talk about values. And there's an ethical illiteracy about the distinction between virtues and values, which people in this group are probably tired of me talking about. But nonetheless, the shorthand of that is that we can use our virtues to navigate through our conflicting value systems. So if you're familiar with Jonathan Haidt's work on the self-righteous mind, there's small differences in priorities that create incredible polarization.
Yes. Yeah.
So we need our virtues to be able to say, yes, this is what we want. This is what we're going for. We have differences in how to get there, but we get locked in the culture wars of conflicting value systems. So I like what you presented there. And the thing about better words, I think that's co-created and, co-negotiated. Even the word fairness, what does that mean? I mean, that word is so loaded. And put aside DEI and equity, in the United States, those words have been actually, destroyed.
Yep.
Well, we're in a cancer culture war. And so, if we're going to try and regenerate regeneration, we have to deal with the toxic culture we're living in. Anyway, that's just a few points.
So, if I may, a slight digression into Canadian history here. The equivalent expression in Canada to the American and I'm now going to forget the American one in the Declaration of Independence.
Life, liberty, and the pursuit.
Life. Thank you very much. Life, liberty, and pursuit.
I knew you were going to have difficulties with that because I don't agree with it. I think it's
right.
flawed.
So the founders of Canada, the settler colonizer founders of Canada, when they went to London to get the British Parliament to pass the act to create Canada as a separate nation from the UK, with its own parliament, etc., in 1865, 1866 is when this was happening. Had a fascinating discussion amongst themselves, which is documented in letters and diary entries about what should Canada's equivalent expression was, and what they all decided based on by that point 300 plus years of interactions between the three founding cultures in Canada, the Indigenous, the French, and the English. Was they wanted peace, fairness, and good governance as the Canadian founding principles. But they realized that, as you just said, Rick, that they could not possibly get the word fairness through the British Parliament because it was antithetical to the notions of top-down control, hierarchy, power, etc. And so they debated amongst themselves, the founders, to see if they could figure out a word that for them would mean fairness, but for the British would mean what the British wanted it to mean. And so they came up with the word order, and because order is a kind of fairness. And so the Canadian expression is peace, order, and good governance. But when we use it in the Canadian context, we mean fairness by the word order. So a little sidebar there, sorry. Couldn't resist. Okay, so thank you for all of those comments. So moving us along, I just ask us to reflect on, do our current words like regeneration, sustainability, fail to meet one or more of these tests? And perhaps we need to do better. And so, as I said, I sometimes get called a positive maverick. And so this is one of the quotes that I really love that kind of empowers me to be a positive maverick. I can't understand why people are frightened of new ideas. I'm frightened of the old ones. So I'd like to get us now to brainstorm a little bit about, well, what could be better words? So let me just grab the link to the right part of the mural here. And again, I've put the 4 criteria. Let's get the link here. Let's put that in the chat. Goodness, there really has been a lot of chat that I haven't seen. So here's the link to the area. And what I'm going to invite you to do is something slightly different this time. So on the left, I'd like people to propose words that they think might be better. And on the right, maybe some words about why you think that word is better than some of the others that we've used in the past. And again, we'll give a couple of minutes for folks to do
Anthony,
that.
can I just take a Sage? Is it possible to open up breakout rooms? I was thinking is there anybody who's having problems with the mural? I really know how to use mural. I got a note from. So I could go into a breakout room and do a little mural coaching with some if anybody wanted.
Okay. So hopefully you just double click on the mural and it creates a sticky new type. But if we need to do a little breakout room or mural, then we can definitely do that.
I mean, I'm happy to just hop over there and do it real fast with anybody that wants to join me and then come back if that's possible to open the breakout room. So
yeah, give me 1 second.
Thank you, David.
I think I would actually think that would be I mean, you don't want to take a whole long time to do a training on mural, but we could do it simultaneous, I think. And
yes, absolutely. Yeah, definitely build some capacity while we're doing an exercise. Very good.
Okay, everyone, there's one room open. So if you're struggling with this mural and you're struggling with getting in there, you can click on participants, I think, or actually you can click on breakout rooms. You can see there's one room there.
For me, it's under the more button.
What's that?
For me, it's under the more button on
under the more button is for you. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm gonna let you guys self opt in, but I've opened up the room and you can join and bounce back at any time. If I see anyone's over there alone and I will bounce over and help save you if you get stuck in a breakout room and you don't know how to get back as well. So if you need any help, David's over there right now as well in the mural. Hopefully everyone's figuring it out. Callie, were you able to get in this time? You're on. Just give me a thumbs up if you're in, if you don't mind. On camera, you can just like do one of these if you got it, or like do one of these if you're not. Okay, all right, you're good. All right, no need to go off of mute. You're fine. Just keep going. Keep going. I'll just checking in on you. All right. Sorry about that, Anthony.
No. I'm this was all a big experiment. So that's perfectly okay. And I'm going to step away for 1 minute, and I will be right back.
Is there anybody needing, if you can, if there's anybody that needs to jump in to David on the mural, wave at me, and I can even throw you into that room if you need help getting over there. So if you need help on mural, if not, I'm going to pull David back into this room. Okay, I think we're good. Thank you, David. I left the room open just in case someone does have an issue and wants to PM you, and you guys can still bounce over if you need to.
Want to give the breakout room a 1 minute warning, Sage?
Nobody took David up on his offer. I think everyone got it worked out over that time
very
on
good.
there. So I think we're
Okay.
okay, sir.
Okay.
I did, just for everyone else, just to remind everyone, I did leave it open. So if you are confused, jump into the breakout room, and if I see someone in there, I'll grab David and throw him in there. I'll discombobulate him.
This will be the last bit of mural work that we do today, I think. So because we're nearing, slowly reaching our time, but we are going to have some more conversation for sure. I love some of these comments. Yes, it is. It is who put the sticky in here. Let's have again, Sage. Again, your point. You're being anti-new words. It's absolutely true that words get misused eventually, either accidentally or deliberately, and that is very problematic. And at the same time, I've observed that headlines matter. And serve as powerful can serve as powerful attractors or repulsors. So there's definitely a tension there for sure. Okay. So let me get all of you back on screen so I can see you all again. Okay, so I would like so hopefully that has been useful. Any thoughts about this process of thinking about new and different words that anybody would like to share? And then I have a proposal of my own that I'm going to suggest and get your reactions to. Samantha. Oh, you're on mute, so.
Can you guys hear me? My microphone's doing weird things.
It's working great.
Sage for getting me here. Thanks, Anthony, here. I really appreciate the way you're thinking about this. I spend a lot of time thinking about these questions. I've just wrote a book called True Human, and I tend to think that the words need to ontologically resituate humans as a custodial species, as a species who has a purpose in the ecology of the planet that we sort of forgot and need to reinstantiate at a planetary scale. So I just wanted to highlight that in terms of why I put those terms there, because they're about who we perceive ourselves to be first. And then I've also been exploring the concept of maturity as like the quality, like that everything we do is relational. And so rather than giving it an adjective in terms of is it regenerative or sustainable, that again, that goes back to the interiority of the gesture. Is it engaging in a way that is relationally mature? And that can speak to inner development as well as societal development. So I thank you for the invitation to offer that.
Thank you, Samantha. That's very helpful. I love that thinking. That's great. Okay. So let me move towards close. Let me get clear here again. Okay, so here's a suggestion, and I invite you to consider this as a thought experiment, and play with it a little bit and see how this idea unfolds for you. So what if we didn't try and sustain a thing? What if we tried to sustain a possibility? And I have to give, and what if that possibility was that human and all other life flourished on our single shared planet for generations to come? What if we tried to sustain that? And I have to give full credit, and I should have really put this on the slide as well, to my colleague and Dr. John Ehrenfeld at MIT. He was one of the founders of the field of industrial ecology. And in 2000, in the Society of Organizational Learning's journal, he published a significant critique of sustainability and sustainable development, starting from the science. He basically said, you know, on a planet where you've got lots of high quality energy arriving every day, we can't sustain anything. It's just not possible. Not only over any considerable period of time. So we need to sustain a possibility. So what possibility could we sustain that is ethically and morally, you know, based on our virtues? Rick, to use your, I think that was Rick who said virtues. Based on our virtues, that would then inform values of with different worldviews. And what would we what is actually practical for us to sustain from a scientific perspective. And so he came up with this idea that we should try to sustain the possibility for human and all other life to flourish on this planet for generations to come. So I've taken that term, and to contrast it with sustainable development, I now say that what we want is sustainable flourishing. Sustainable. And so the question I have, and I invite us to consider for the remaining few minutes, is could that be good for everyone and everything? With all of the context that you've all brought to the conversation so far. We don't quite have time to do the exercise of going into mural for this, but I wanted to share, here's some words that other people have come up with when they hear this word flourish. When I've done this exercise before, I've not had the chance to do the word regeneration before today, so that's been very interesting for me. But when you compare the words that people come up with sustainable versus flourish, there is a very significant difference between people's use of the term, the understanding that they have of the two words. Rick, please. You're on mute, Rick.
No, I just wanted to compliment you on what you're trying to do here in terms of co-creation and creating a space where people can share and hopefully converge on the meaning of flourishing. I really appreciated the Canadian context that you made reference to about taking the word equity out. It's interesting that the Brits were so effective in maintaining their hierarchy that they were able to do the same thing on the American Constitution, because it's been one of the greatest enablers of escalating inequities in the name of absolute libertarianism. So, you know, if we're going to contest the systemic prejudice against this, we have to have a counter language to do it. And this word exercise is incredibly important. I put in the chat, I didn't put in the mirror board, but I put in the chat, you know, the counterpoint to life living, the pursuit of happiness, is to equity, love, and the pursuit of truth seeking. And, you know, the words that we live by are incredibly important if we were going to actually align our divergent mindsets. So I just wanted to thank you for the presentation, initiating that, because this needs to be iterative. It needs to be an ongoing process. This is not a one-shot workshop. This should be part of our learning systems, and our learning systems aren't designed for this type of work. So I could talk at length at this, but I'll shut up and let somebody else chime in, or you could. Okay.
I was going to mention before I close, and I'll do it now since you brought it up, Rick. It's absolutely my view that we need a worldwide conversation about this topic. And actually, Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, tried to initiate such a conversation on the occasion of the 75th anniversary of the United Nations in 2020. But we all know what happened in 2020. And I actually believe that one of the biggest unseen impacts of the pandemic was that the conversation that he intended to have, which was going to set the stage for what comes after the SDGs, was trying to build the consensus, trying to build the big tent for what we want afterwards, didn't happen. The public research component of that project was done, and I understand that it was the largest ever mass consultation of humans ever. It was a very, very large sample size across, I don't know what percentage of the member states of the United Nations it was, but it was a pretty high percentage. And the results were published, and it's pretty clear that what people want is they want improved well-being. Although the word flourishing didn't appear directly, certainly a lot of the words associated with flourishing that are on the screen here now definitely did appear. I'm involved in a couple of projects that are advising the United Nations about what comes after the SDGs, and the word flourishing is one of the words that's being used about that, and I can talk more about that at another time.
Anthony,
so
can I be just very quick and say a few words, which is,
please.
We need to have simple words that people understand and people can buy. I'm not suggesting this is right, but I think Brian brought it up in terms of what is it thriving, is it flourishing? We go through this, and it has to be co-created so people buy into it. But co-create fair, free, flourishing futures for all. That's what I think some people can buy into. But fairness has to be negotiated.
Yep.
Otherwise, we'll fall apart at the seams.
Yep, absolutely. Just a few words about flourishing technically. One of the origins of the use of the word in terms of a goal for humans, and in this case, individual humans, is from positive psychology, which of course the group of psychologists who in the early 90s started to ask what makes a fully well human being rather than diagnosing ILF. And so they came up with this positive psychology human potential continuum, with at the left-hand end death and absence of life, obviously fairly unattractive and undesirable, at least for those of us who are conscious and enjoy consciousness. The next step on the continuum they labeled as surviving, which is sort of just getting by. And I should notice that these are terms that ecologists will also recognize. So Samantha, to your point, a lot of this terminology that the positive psychologists picked up on, including Jonathan Haidt, who was mentioned earlier as well, also applies to non-human life as well as human life. And then we have languishing, was the next term that they used, i.e. life is sort of blah and grey. And then flourishing was what they used as a label for the best that human life can aim for. So the best that we can be based on nature and nurture. And so, of course, in an ecological, a non-human life perspective, an ecologist who observing an ecosystem that was at its maximum potential based on the available energy, we'll call that a climax ecosystem. And that's an ecosystem that is flourishing in the same way. It's got to the best state that it could possibly be based on nature and nurture. When I and my colleagues have been thinking about this, we've come to a big picture understanding of if we wanted the possibility for flourishing, if we wanted to sustain that, what would we need? What are the requirements for it? And I think here's where the knowledge, the depth of knowledge and experience and expertise that you all have really becomes absolutely vital. So the first is that we need clean air and water, vibrant soil for food, and healthy ecosystems creating materials for us and rendering our biological wastes harmless. And of course, the natural sciences have got an awful lot to tell us about how we have to do this. And clearly, we've done so much damage to many ecosystems today that these first 3 points are no longer true, and therefore the classical use of the term regeneration is absolutely vital. But the wider term that and she's left said earlier becomes important for the next one, because we also need trusting relationships focused on well-being with all of our fellow citizens at all scales. So neighbors, communities, cities, regions, and countries, and beyond to the entire world. And notice here how I'm using a science-based understanding that the society is entirely enclosed within the environment and ultimately dependent upon a healthy environment. And then within society, we need individuals to make choices that are aligned with sustaining the possibility for flourishing. And those choices have to cross all dimensions of the human experience: emotional, spiritual, physical, practical, artistic, economic, etc., etc. And then last but not least, we know there are many things that we need in order to be able to flourish that we've come to depend on, that mean we need to collaborate and cooperate to create those things and help meet our needs. And so that's what the economy is designed for. It's to help us meet the needs that we can't meet by ourselves. And so we're going to need organizations to choose to cooperate, collaborate, and compete to best meet our needs today and in the future, whilst creating the wealth we need to meet our shared needs. So this is our view of the big picture, and I hopefully you can see regeneration, the concept as a process that we need to be applying, really crosses all four of these big picture dimensions as a requirement to enable the possibility for flourishing. So I just wanted to compare sustainability versus flourishing. For me, sustainable development is in the middle, and life as usual is on the left. And if we continue to fail to even have sustainable development, which itself is not achievable because we can't have unending economic growth on a finite planet, the things going on the left are going to happen. And obviously the limits to growth updates that have been done, including the report that our colleagues at Redesign for Resilience and Regeneration R3.0 recently shared, it's pretty clear that that's the direction we're heading in. And at the other side is where we would design for flourishing. Labels that I and colleagues have been using to describe the right-hand side include thriving, regenerative, and distributive economy and society within a flourishing environment. But there are many other words that can be used to try and articulate what the right-hand side means, and the points that I've called out there around it are just some perhaps interesting examples. We are basically at time. We've got a couple of minutes left, but maybe I'll leave this with you as a final question for you to reflect upon. If Sage and Dave want to continue the conversation using some of the thinking that we've done today together, maybe this is a useful next step. I'm suggesting perhaps up to you to make that call, obviously. I also wanted to share some reflection questions, again, to prompt some further thinking, not now, but what outcomes do we actually want people, communities, and non-human ecosystems and human societies and our economies to experience? What should we have after the SDGs? Because they do come to an end in 4 years' time. And what if we started from the perspective of the purpose, the goal, that we're trying to achieve? How would that change things for us as change makers, as us trying to make systems change? And where does our systems change work need more clarity before it can scale its impact? And what commitments can we make as a community to communicate more effectively and inclusively? And last, how might our work change if we describe our future in a way that people immediately want to join, so meet that marketing test? So I'll come back to questions in just a second, but we have part 2 of this conversation in April, and that's when I would like to introduce you to the work we've been doing to think about how do we accelerate systems change towards, in our case, we've chosen flourishing in our community as the purpose that we're trying to enable, and we've got some ideas about how we might accelerate our progress towards that purpose. That's, as I said, 15 years of research and practice in a worldwide community that I'm going to share that with you and get your perspective on it and have a chance to have you ask questions and learn. So with that, I'll hand it back to Sage, and I don't know why I've started swapping you around, Sage.
Right.
So I'll hand it back to Sage and let you facilitate the last few minutes.
All right, everyone. First and foremost, I'm launching a poll in chat. I just want to get some feedback on what you guys thought of today's session. I'd like to know what you thought stood out. I'd like to know where you think we missed the mark. And do you want more interview styles like this, where instead of just an interview like we've seen a lot in the past, which, by the way, Tally, I'm dying to interview you. I'd love to learn more about your work. But do we want more thought experiments where we're actually sitting in this? I know GRC maybe as a whole might need a combination of both of those, but just curious what you guys thought of today. So if you don't mind, if you could answer some of those questions. I didn't make any of them mandatory, so you can answer just one if you want and submit if something jumps out at you. That said, the last few weeks we've had off. I don't have anyone for next week for interviews. So if you know anyone who you'd like to see come up where we can have this interview style, today is a little bit different. where Antony was more presenting these concepts and we were sort of working together with collective intelligence. But if you have someone that you'd love just to learn more about, regeneration's tough. This whole world, this impact world we're in is very tough. There's landmines everywhere, pitfalls everywhere, and the reality is understanding what it really takes to get this work done is what we're trying to highlight here. Antony, we've been very blessed to have you here today. It's been a really good, thought-provoking conversation. The chat was electric, so I hope you guys can save that chat and look back on those things later. Guys, today, Antony and I both came in with the intention of let's see if we can change just a little bit and have some intentional thought around the way we are communicating in relationship with others. And I love the way the chat went. You guys, thank you so much for showing up today. And we'll leave it up to open chat at this point. But this is the end of our meeting today. I'm going to stop the recording and we'll have the open floor and you guys can leave if you like.